The transatlantic relationship has been the founding component of the institutional architecture that we know for the past 70 years. The partnership between countries of the current European Union and the United States were the cornerstone of the United Nations, were the cornerstone of the World Trade Organization, founded really the component pieces of how we regulate and how we function in a rules-based global order. And now we suddenly have two things occurring on both sides of the Atlantic. On the one side, we have, for the first time in the United States history, a president who is questioning the validity of that global order, the functionality of that global order, and is starting to portray allies as rivals. That is an absolutely historic development that we have never had since the end of World War II. And on the other side, in Europe, we are seeing a fracture within the European Union. We have some states on the eastern side of the European Union that are moving toward what they define as illiberal democracies and are proud of that status, if you will. But they're really putting into question the very foundational components of what makes the European Union. The European Union was supposed to be a grouping of democracies committed to pluralism, committed to open societies. And suddenly you have societies within Europe that are closing off, that are wanting to close their borders. And you have a number of crises that threaten the integrity of the European Union from the inside. So whether it's the migration question, whether it's the unanswered questions around the financial issues after the euro crisis, and then generally this attitude or lack of understanding in some cases among some populations in the European Union of the validity of the West and of the validity of democracy. And you're seeing some of those tendencies just as much on the United States side. So what we're trying to do here, why it's important to talk about what our common values are, how we can create cohesion in a time that's very difficult, where it seems the Atlantic Ocean has turned into an abyss, is absolutely critical, because there are ties that bind, current ties, economic ties, ties between people, but then also political ties around NATO, for instance, that anchors the security for both sides of that Atlantic alliance. So it's critical to talk about this now, because more so than ever before, though we've had our political differences, we're talking about a rift in the substance. We're talking about people questioning the validity and the integrity of this partnership. And it is, in my mind, the partnership worth upholding in the globe. It makes the United States special because it can anchor its allies in the way that other rivaling powers, Russia and China, can't. So this is a relationship worth fighting for, in my mind. It's a relationship worth thinking about, redefining what its future can be, so that citizens on both sides of the Atlantic understand how important this relationship is to them, their development, both economically and in security terms. And so what makes it really truly worth fighting for this kind of cohesion and for this partnership going forward. Well, by 2050, most people around this planet, on this planet, will live in cities. They will live in cities in the developed economies, right across the northwest of this world, if you will, or just above the equator. But they will predominantly begin to live together in cities and urban, dense environments, particularly around in the southern hemisphere. We're also seeing that, for instance, large migrant camps are beginning to turn into sort of urban, or transforming into sort of urban situations in the way that we've never seen before. Some of these migrant camps are 3 million people strong. So cities, because of the density, are both the locus and will be the locus of innovation and problem solving, in as much as they will harbor a whole set of new problems. They will focus, almost like under a microscope, some of the effects of these sort of transnational problems. So climate change, pandemic disease, failures to integrate different groups of people, radicalization or isolation will manifest first and foremost, and manifest right now, in the urban environment. So enlightened mayors all around the world have begun to reach out to one another beyond what is the national sphere to try to figure out how to address these issues. And that is where cities come into a global arena in a way that they haven't in decades before, because they now see that these problems are too big to solve in City Hall, and they're reaching out to one another to see how they can address these complex issues. And they have to do it much faster in many cases than national governments, although that's usually the locus of problem solving, because they have these issues of a population that wants and demands change now, and that density pushes the resolution, or at least the attempt, to address some of these critical problems. So if we look specifically at the transatlantic relationship, where progress seems stalled on many issues, including the prevention of climate change, including the global examination of issues that are raised by inequality, particularly in cities, we're seeing that cities on both sides of the Atlantic have realized, well, even if we can't speak to the national level, even if the United States of Donald Trump sees the European Union and cities and places and spaces within as rival entities, and businesses within as rival entities, that is not in factuality and actuality the case. So cities all across Europe are working with other cities, including in my hometown of Boston, to work together to address and to still live up, for instance, to what is mapped out in the Paris Climate Change Agreement. So what you will see is, in fact, that many states in the United States and cities will achieve goals that they set out as part of the Paris Climate Change Agreement because they continue to work with counterparts in Europe. The mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, has been pushing and spearheading these issues because they see the effect that climate change has on their urban environment. And so that is where we're going to see challenges, I think, if you will, to the global architecture, because cities are beginning to find their voice. They're beginning to find partners that are willing to listen and work with one another and really push on what one might think would be a sort of progressive, humanistic agenda, but not because they're all just merely enlightened, but because they have the urgency to do so, and because the fact that we all live together in urban spaces demands action. And so you're seeing a new class of mayors being elected, and you're seeing a different kind of commitment to make change on a global scale, even if you're coming from an urban environment.